Defending Israel with David Harris on JBS is made possible in part by a generous gift in memory of Eric and Mira J. Spector, the Paul and Lynn Late Family Foundation, To Life, to Love, Barbara and Bob Goodkind, the Patricia Worthen Ullman Foundation,
I'm Shahar Azani, and today, as always, I'm pleased to join David Harris on Defending Israel, more relevant than ever. Israel keeps on fighting Hamas strongholds in Gaza with tremendous achievements and successes on the ground, from the destruction of tunnels and terrorist infrastructure to taking out dozens of terrorists and gaining control of the smuggling routes Hamas uses from Egypt and elsewhere. On the table is yet another deal made public by President Biden with vile Hamas to return the hostages, while we learned this week the heartbreaking news that 4 more were murdered while in captivity. While the south is simmering, the north is burning with increasing attacks by Hezbollah against towns and villages up in northern Israel, causing tremendous damage to infrastructure and massive wildfires in the entire region. David, as you hear all of the above, and as we are sitting here to speak on the anniversary of the Six-Day War, June 5th, what are your thoughts?
Well, let me first of all dial back to 1967, because as you said, this is the anniversary. Right. Now, some people may say, Shahar, history? Don't go back 6 decades, David. It's irrelevant. It's meaningless. History is what I had for breakfast this morning. But if we don't understand what happened in 1967, Shahar, we cannot understand today. There is a direct link. For example,
right,
from 1948 until 1967, that 6-day war, for 19 years, Egypt, ladies and gentlemen, ruled Gaza. And Jordan, ladies and gentlemen, ruled the West Bank and Eastern Jerusalem.
Right.
Shahar, you're a student of the region. You're a product of the region. Any conversation during 19 years about creating an independent Palestinian state? I never found it. Right. I've looked and I've looked, I've asked, nothing. For 19 years, the Arab world could have created an independent Palestinian state covering Gaza, the West Bank and Eastern Jerusalem, and Israel would have had nothing to say about it because it wasn't in control. And yet, it didn't happen. Or how about this? The PLO, which participated in the Six-Day War, was not founded as a result of the Six-Day War and Israel's seizure of the West Bank and Gaza. It was founded in 1964, 3 years before the Six-Day War. Why was the PLO founded? Not to free settlements in the West Bank or Gaza, but to annihilate Israel, remove it from the map. So Shahar, I could spend the whole show talking about lessons from the Six-Day War, but simply to say that viewers of JBS need to know the history, because without the history, there can be no understanding of where we are today.
So in a way, we're going back to the same conversation, David, because the accusations of occupation and focusing on settlements has really turned now, post-October 7th, to a discussion about Israel's occupation of space and Israelis and Jews' occupation of oxygen in the Middle East, because the outright calls we hear out there is for the annihilation of Israel. Nobody goes down to the details of, borders or boundaries. They're outrightly calling for this colonial entity to disappear. Is that not what we're seeing out there on college campuses and on the streets of our major cities?
Look, Shahar, for a while, for a number of years, when people saw the end the occupation signs among pro-Palestinian supporters on campuses or streets or elsewhere, many convinced themselves, including many Jews, Israelis, convinced themselves that the occupation referred to 1967, the Six-Day War, a war of self-defense for Israel's very survival.
True.
Lo and behold, those of us those of us who questioned those signs and what they really meant, have now been vindicated, because it's the occupation of 1947,
right,
not 1967.
Right.
Jews may still want to debate among themselves, how much of the West Bank should we give up? All, a part, some, none. We're having that debate inside the Jewish community. The other side is having a very different discussion.
Very different discussion.
Let those Jews have that conversation.
Right.
Our conversation is about how to destroy the state of Israel. We think, wrongly I believe, we, meaning they, think the wind is at our back. The momentum is there.
You know, I'm listening to you. And I'm listening to the beautiful monologues that you're giving, and the one that you gave last week about historical lessons. And what I keep on hearing is exactly the same thing, that we may be having our own internal conversations, but we're not really listening to what the other side is saying and doing, and to their declared intents, and which brings us to horrible results like what we've seen on October 7th. So we were mentioning, for instance, the treatment of the Islamic Republic of Iran and its declarations and the appeasement process. How do you view our state of mind at the moment? Are you seeing any change in the way of either international policy vis-a-vis Iran or the internal conversations we're having in the Jewish community based on those historical lessons?
It's a great question, and I wish I could give you a clear, definitive no. There's no comparison between what happened in the pre-World War II years and today. But that monologue was really a kind of attempt at a wake-up call.
Right.
And what I tried to say is, number one, what happened pre-World War II was not inevitable. Winston Churchill himself said that World War II was, quote, the unnecessary war.
Unnecessary.
Unnecessary. He was asked by President Roosevelt, who said he was looking for a name for the war.
Right.
And Churchill responded immediately, Mr. President, call it the unnecessary war. Why did Churchill say it? Because he said that from 1933, when Hitler took power, until 1939, when the German army invaded Poland, in those 6+ years, the Germans could have been stopped. They could have been stopped. They could have been stopped when they violated the Versailles Treaty and engaged in military conscription. And then in the buildup of their army and their navy and their air force, again a violation. And when they entered the Rhineland, and the Spanish Civil War, where they sided with the fascists, and the Ethiopian-Abyssinian conflict, where they sided with the fascists, and then the Anschluss with Austria, and then the parceling of Czechoslovakia. Churchill, a voice in the wilderness, kept saying they could have been stopped, but there was a failure of imagination. And this is what I keep shouting from the rooftops today, Shahar, a failure of imagination. In 1924, the New York Times had an article. The headline of the article was, Hitler tamed by prison.
Tamed.
Tamed. He had just been released from the Landsberg prison, where he had written Mein Kampf. Anyone at the time who could read German could have understood exactly what Hitler's game plan was. It was all spelled out. There were no secrets. But they ascribed it to lunacy, to extremism. And according to the Times, he was going to retire to his native Austria. Now, 9 years later, 1933, Hitler gained power. One would think, like to think, that world leaders would have said, well, who is this corporal, this failed artist? Who is he? Well, we have a document, Mein Kampf. Let's read it. State Department, read it. Intelligence agencies, read it. Foreign Office, read it. Quai d'Orsay, read it. Instead, they assumed that these were just polemics and that being in government would again tame Hitler. After all, you have to pick up the garbage and you have to deliver the mail, right? They completely misread him.
But I gotta ask you, David, something that I'm sure everybody listening to you now has that question. These are all intelligent people at the highest places of government, in academia. I mean, how could they have missed those blaring red lights, those signs? And what are the parallels to today's world?
So the first reason they missed the signs, and again, all of this has parallels.
Right.
The first reason they missed the signs is because they didn't want to see the signs. They were exhausted by the First World War. Many of us in this generation don't appreciate the destruction, the damage, the fatalities of the First World War. Britain and France had no desire to fight a Second World War, number one. And number two, if you read people like Neville Chamberlain, the Prime Minister in the late 30s, he was not a bad man, Shahar. But he believed, and he said it, that Hitler would not mislead me. Gentlemen give their word. And in the world in which they live, the world of Harvard and Yale and Oxford and Cambridge and Western sort of reason, you don't shake hands unless you mean it. You don't sign an agreement unless you intend to keep the agreement. So first, they didn't want to know. But secondly, Hitler was beyond their ability to understand. Right. And the other lesson, Shahar, of the period is appeasement does not work. The British and the French tried it with the Germans. In the end, they fed them Czechoslovakia. Right. And by the way, Hitler said at the time, that's all I want. That's all I want. He told Chamberlain, that's all I want. Lo and behold, it wasn't long before he also wanted Poland, and then he wanted the Netherlands and Belgium and Luxembourg and Norway and then France and then Greece and Yugoslavia. Keep going, keep going. Appeasement does not work. So today, I believe the central issue for us is Iran. Obviously, in a larger conversation, it's Russia and China as well. Right. It's Iran. And I believe that we see some very eerie parallels. We're tired of war in the Middle East. We, the United States, we were in long, costly, protracted, increasingly unpopular wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. We don't want another war.
But I want to, before you proceed on this issue, you're saying Iran is the issue for us. And I just want to understand, a lot of people may claim that Iran's issue is with Israel. And it's the state of Israel that bothers the Islamic Republic. How do you see Iran being an American issue? Explain that for him.
Without getting too detailed, right. Israel is Iran's Czechoslovakia. It's the beginning of the story. It's not the end of the story. So for the appeasers out there right. who want to believe if only we feed Israel in some way, shape, or form, Iran will be satisfied. It will turn inward. It will begin to liberalize. A new Thomas Jefferson will emerge. Women will suddenly have rights. Dissidents will be able to protest openly.
And Khamenei will retire.
Yes. If not to Austria, to the countryside. Right. Exactly. There are those parallels. Iran has always referred to the United States as the great Satan. Israel for them is the little Satan. This is about ideology, it's about worldview, it's about their interpretation of Islam and the role of Islam not just in Iran but in the world. Islam, let's remember, unlike Judaism, is an expansionist religion. We make it very hard as Jews for people to join us. Right. Sometimes I would argue too hard. Yeah. I believe we should be giving some signing bonuses to people. Yeah. Come join us.
But even if you're on the inside, they'll give you trouble.
Exactly. Yeah. But look at the Ottoman Empire right. over centuries and its expansionism. For example, look at Iran's tentacles. It's not just Israel. It's Iran in Iraq. It's Iran in Yemen. It's Iran in Syria. Yep. It's Iran in Lebanon. Yes. It's Iran in Gaza. It's not only about Israel. Right. And how about Iran in Argentina? And 2 terror attacks that killed Israeli diplomats right. and that killed JCC members in the AMIA. Right. How about Iran elsewhere in the world, including in Europe, in Africa, in Asia? So too many people today, out of fatigue, number one, and number two, a failure of imagination.
Failure of imagination.
There it is again. Hitler presented Mein Kampf to the world and said, read it. Iran has presented its manifestos again and again and again. It makes no secret of it. Right. It burns American flags. Anyone old enough to remember the seizure of the American embassy?
Yes.
And the Americans held for well over a year as hostages? So wake up, wake up. We can't afford a failure of imagination again. We can't afford a policy of appeasement. And there's a third lesson of the earlier period. When America stayed neutral across the ocean, believing it could wall itself off from all of these issues, the world was in greater danger, and ultimately America had to return. And I believe, for those who are listening and saying, well, wait a second, does David Harris want to push us into war with Iran? Absolutely not. Let me be clear. But the only way, I believe, to prevent an eventual war with Iran is to show strength and deterrence and resilience now.
Right.
Now, as with military conscription in the 1930s in Germany, as with the weapons buildup, as with Rhineland, show it now. I fear Iran doesn't take us seriously enough and doesn't believe what the administration says from time to time, because they see. Shahar, you may have seen the Wall Street Journal a few days ago. Shocking headline. The United States opposes European attempts to criticize Iran at the International Atomic Energy Agency. Hey, what's going on here?
Right.
The United States is opposing Britain and France. Things have flipped.
Completely.
Why? Why did the United States express official condolences when President Raisi was killed in the helicopter crash? Now, normally, countries do this for other countries, but Raisi had the blood of thousands and thousands of Iranians.
Carried with pride, the butcher of Tehran.
And the only thing he regretted in life was he didn't get the chance to kill more women activists and political dissidents and non-believers. And we express condolences. By the way, in this, jumping ahead, the Secretary General of the United Nations behaved abominably when he went and officially went to the condolence book to express his deep sorrow about the death of the butcher of Tehran.
It's unbelievable.
So there's a lot going on here. We need American leadership. We need American clarity of vision. We need no more failures of imagination. And we need to recall that appeasement backfires.
You know, you're talking about standing up to Iran. You're talking about failure of imagination, but like you say now, I hear more significant failure of leadership. And I want to ask you, again, for the sake of educating our viewers, in standing up to Iran, there is more than one way, as they say, to skin a cat. You don't just have to engage in actual war. There are other measures you can take to stand up to the regime.
So let's go back now to 2015. Shahar, which you'll remember was the year of the Iranian nuclear deal,
right,
otherwise known as the JCPOA.
Right.
And Ben Rhodes, who worked by President Obama's side, tried to frame it in black and white. He did it maliciously, but knowingly. And what he said to the world was, there are only two ways to approach Iran. You either support this deal, or if you don't, it means you're a warmonger.
Warmonger.
A warmonger. So he tried to point to those of us, by the way, in the US Congress, Democrats and Republicans, in the House and the Senate, people across the nation, including majorities of Americans who opposed the deal according to all the surveys and polls. He tried to depict all of us as warmongers. But you're right. Those are not the two choices. There are other choices. Showing strength. At the end of the day, the balance of power between the United States and Iran is extraordinarily in favor of the United States.
Right.
Iran was terrified, we know, in 2003 after the American invasion of Iraq. Remember, Iran fought Iraq for 8 years to a standstill. America defeated the same Iraq, led by Saddam Hussein again, in a matter of minutes, days, a couple of weeks. Iran understood the power that was unleashed by America. At that moment, Iran froze. But gradually it saw that America was distracted It didn't really have the stomach. It was focused on Iraq. It was focused on Afghanistan. Later on, the economic travails here, then on COVID, then on getting out of Afghanistan in the shameful way that we did.
Right.
Now on the Gaza conflict, on Ukraine. So Iran has benefited from our distraction. And they're no dummies. One of the lessons of military warfare is never underestimate your enemy.
Right.
They understand. They're reading us. They don't believe we have the appetite, the backbone. We have to prove them wrong. It's late in the day, Shahar. It's very late in the day.
It's also visible, David, because when you go after the U.S. allies in the Middle East, of course, first and foremost Israel, and you can see the brazen attacks by Iranian proxy Hezbollah, that's also a direct message to the U.S., not just to Israel.
And keep going. How about the Houthis firing at shipping in the Arabian Gulf, or as the Iranians called it, the Persian Gulf?
Right.
How about attacks on American targets in Iraq, including Kurdistan, the Northern Third, a very important ally of the American people and of the United States?
True.
They see us. They see us trying to avoid direct confrontation. And by the way, let's go a step further. Since October the 7th, the U.S. government has been very reluctant to connect Iran to the events in Gaza.
Right.
Now, without having all of the intel, as they say, it's very hard to believe that what happened on October 7th happened without Iranian knowledge, connivance, or direct involvement. So why can't we say it publicly? We're focused on Hamas, we're focused on the Muslim Brotherhood, and we're focused on the connection between them and Iran. But we're tongue-tied when it comes to Iran.
Right.
So we try and prevent criticism at the IAEA. We express condolences for the butcher of Tehran when he's killed in a crash. And we avoid naming Iran as part of the Hamas story. Could Hamas really mount this kind of attack without Iranian weaponry, logistics, training, and funding?
Correct.
And how about one more player, Qatar? Again, we're tongue-tied. Where does the money come from? Qatar has almost limitless pockets, bottomless pockets, limitless wallets.
Right.
$1 trillion, according to ISCAP, the organization that I'm associated with, the Institute for the Study of Global Anti-Semitism and Policy.
Which has been, by the way, one of the first, if not the first, to call out the entire effect and influence that Qatar and others have had on U.S. academia, the results of which are sadly visible on the streets of the U.S. and hopefully won't reflect in the future of this magnificent country.
You are so right, and that's frankly why, after my own career in the Jewish world, I joined ISCAP, because I believed, as I looked around, here was an organization that was doing something serious,
Right.
urgent, and no one else was doing it.
Right.
And you're right, they have put the issue of follow the money onto the American agenda.
Years before it became the conversation of the day. And I know that, I'm always frustrated by this, that we speak for only a brief second and our viewers can notice. But one of the things I love the most about our conversations is looking reality in the eye and naming names. Those who stand by the right side of history and those who are against morality and goodness. And I want to refer to you now as a reminder for our viewers. On your list, the nice and naughty, as a to-do list, not just a recommendation. That's how we should carry ourselves moving forward. We heard about the Maldives preventing Israelis from entering their territory, supposedly. Where do we stand on that list, David?
Okay. So shall we start with the good guys or the bad guys?
Let's start with the good guys, because I always find it easier to complain and people forget to say thank you. So let's know who we should thank.
Okay. Well, I want to begin by thanking some inside the Jewish world, if I may.
Right.
Because just a couple of days ago, my family and I were at the Salute to Israel parade in New York, and I've been going for a gazillion years.
Right.
This was by far the most impressive parade I have seen. The turnout was astonishing. We're told that well over 100,000 people marched, and many more were on the sidewalks on Fifth Avenue.
And we were, for those of us who weren't here, JBS aired it live.
And JBS
it was beautiful
aired it.
to see it.
It was a great event, and I have to tell you, it was, I think, something many of us needed.
Yes.
We needed to be there and to see it and to feel it and to touch it. It inspired and strengthened us. And I want to give a big shout out to UJA Federation in New York and the Jewish Community Relations Council in New York, because they made it happen. Governor Hochul, Kathy Hochul of New York State, was there and once again affirmed her absolute commitment to the state of Israel, and we need to applaud it and we need to thank her. And Mayor Eric Adams of New York has been another stalwart, Shahar, from beginning until today. He's never faltered. He traveled to Israel like some other officials did, but he's been with us.
You know, I loved it, and I think it was a couple of weeks ago, he was heckled by somebody on the street, you know, those pro-terror mobsters, and he lashed out at them and said, and what about the hostages? And what about the hostages?
I saw that. Senator Schumer is a more complicated story, I have to say. He was at the rally. I think he got a mixed reception, if I can put it diplomatically. I think he made a serious mistake.
He did.
In his earlier Senate speech. His public position, I believe, should be as a shomer, as a supporter and guardian of the state of Israel and the relationship. If he has any private qualms about Israeli leadership, he's got many channels to convey them privately.
Very true.
But all he did was give a kind of lift to the other side, and that was very unfortunate. Richie Torres, Congressman Richie Torres, is just spectacular. He shows up everywhere. He does it quietly. He does it humbly. But he is extraordinarily eloquent and effective. And of course, as a self-proclaimed progressive, he really gets under the skin of these progressive Nazi youth marching around at Columbia and elsewhere, because he identifies with all the legitimately progressive causes. So bless him. John Fetterman, Senator John Fetterman. I mean, I admit to being surprised, because when he was running for office, there were questions about his physical health, his ability to take on the job. He has been the standout on the Democratic side. There's no question about it, and it continues from day. So it's not a one-day event. Day after day, Shahar.
I saw, you know, he was just the commencement speaker at Yeshiva University's graduation.
And you saw what he did. He was wearing the academic robes, I guess, as opposed to his hoodie sweatshirt and his shorts.
That's true.
And he has a degree from Harvard. And he took off the Harvard piece of his academic robe, and he discarded it because of his disappointment. So there's that. I applaud the ADL for starting a lawsuit against Jewish Voice for Peace with the Federal Election Commission, exposing them as the fraud they are. I applaud Vice President Mike Pence, who came to the Jerusalem Post Conference and spoke beautifully. Nikki Haley and Mike Pompeo on the Republican side, who've been with us from day one. So there are lots and lots of people, but then we have the other side. So I have my 10-country list, and JBS viewers, if you're planning any trips, if you're thinking about any investments or deals, business deals overseas, keep in mind these countries that are not our friends, and I mean big time. We have in Europe today Spain, Ireland, and Norway, which on their own chose now, in the midst of a Hamas-instigated war, to recognize a non-existent Palestinian state. Unilaterally, no release of hostages, no concessions on the Palestinian side, but this they thought was the perfect time to recognize a non-existent Palestinian state.
How else do you reward rape and torture?
And by the way, Shahar, yes, 16 years ago, if I'm correct, Kosovo became an independent state. 16 years later, Spain has still not recognized it. The Kurds have been clamoring for decades for a state of their own, and they have a legitimate case to make. Spain, silent. Spain, Ireland, and Norway. Turkey, that President Erdogan, that people occasionally think in Washington or even in Jerusalem can be someone to work with, has once again proved he is an enemy of the state of Israel. And he is joined together with South Africa in this outrageous, bogus effort to tar and feather Israel with genocide charges. That's 5. The Maldives, you mentioned, the Maldive Islands, the beautiful beach destination for many. Find other beaches.
Yeah.
Find other beaches. Go to Italy, go to Greece, go to Florida.
Go to Tel Aviv.
Go to Israel.
Yep.
The Maldives. And then 4 countries in Latin America today. Bolivia, Brazil, Chile, and Colombia, all of whom have become viciously anti-Israel, completely lost the plot. Now, this is in addition, of course, when people ask, well, what about Cuba and what about Venezuela?
Right.
Those are the usual suspects.
Right.
I'm talking about 10 countries that JBS viewers may visit on vacation, sightseeing, shopping, trading, investing. Think twice before you do it.
Right.
AIPAC. I want to give a big shout out to my friends at AIPAC. They have taken the gloves off in recent years. And
Yeah,
they're having an effect. Bless them. Support them. I have no vested interest. I'm not a shareholder. But they're taking on Jamal Bowman.
But you are. You are a shareholder in humanity.
In the broadest sense of the word.
You are a shareholder and all of us are. All of us are.
I'm now on the ISCAP team, so when I speak about the important work of ISCAP, I also have a vested interest, so to speak. When I speak about AIPAC, as a member of the pro-Israel community, they've taken on Jamal Bowman.
Yeah.
They've taken on Cory Bush in this round of primaries. Hopefully they'll succeed.
Amen.
But we all need to support AIPAC.
True. And we all need to stand on the right side of history. And David, I am always frustrated by the short amount of time JBS is giving us for our conversations, but it's always a pleasure. And you know what? Listening to you now and connecting it with what you said in your monologue last week is a beautiful way to take with us profound lessons that even $300,000 worth of poison Ivy League degrees won't get you. Thank you so much for your incredible words of wisdom and encouragement, because listening to you gives me a lot of strength to carry on and a lot of inspiration to move on.
And Mazal Tov to you and your family. Your son is graduating from Ramaz this week as valedictorian. Wow.
Thank you so much. He was able to avoid some part of the Gene family. As we always say, may we heed the lessons of the past, David. Thank you so much for all that you're doing. These are trying times for all of us, and the only way we get through them is together. So as we always say,
Yisrael Chai.
Thank you very much.